Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is April 20, 2020, and this is a video about Bernie Sanders' continued betrayal of his base. Before we get into the video, if you could hit the like, share, subscribe, comment, all that interaction helps to boost this channel, helps more people to see this nice socialist content. Follow us on Facebook, support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and thanks to our current patrons. So with that out of the way, I did a couple of videos on this last week. First, Bernie Sanders' unprompted exit from the Democratic primary against his followers' wishes, and then Obama's endorsement of Joe Biden, which in my view signals that they really are going with Joe Biden. It's wrapped up. They're not going to try to replace him with Cuomo because Obama has now signed his name to Joe Biden. That's my opinion anyway. Since that time, a number of events have transpired. Elizabeth Warren has endorsed Biden. Like, everyone is now fully on Team Biden, riding with Biden right off a fucking cliff. So am I upset? The Democratic Party is a bourgeois party. It's owned and controlled by capitalists. They do entice a lot of working class people to get involved in their base. Normally, we as socialists would be focusing on socialist parties that advance a truly socialist agenda. In the United States, there is a kind of unusual history of there not really being left parties for some very complicated reasons that maybe someday I'll do a direct video on. But basically, the liberals and the right, I mean, that is left liberals and the far right and Republicans and conservatives and that whole right-wing alliance have consistently aligned to stamp out any kind of opposition at all, anything to the left of left liberals whatsoever. And they've been ratcheting that up more and more since the 70s or 80s, the time of the neoliberal turn, which is when the 1% decided to undo the New Deal and all of the social democratic welfare capitalist type programs and taxation and regulation. So cut to the 2010s after the 2008 banking crisis, following Bill Clinton's deregulation of the banks in 1999, undoing the Glass-Steagall Act. That was a really key piece of legislation, reining in what the capitalists could do. Capitalism is, by its nature, a system of organized exploitation for profit, but there are some key reforms, such as Glass-Steagall, which did at least confine that exploitation to some kind of bounds. This is not an argument for capitalism, for social democracy. We as socialists want to abolish private property, but it is a fact that we know that when capitalism is not regulated in the particular way that Glass-Steagall did, it crashes about every 10 to 15 years. The capitalists were able, by passing Glass-Steagall, to get a certain amount of stability to their system, mostly stability for capitalists, although it did enable the growth of a middle class. This clearly was not their long-term wishes as they undid those regulations, leading to, again, 9 years later, right in that 10 to 15 year kind of timeline, a crash. And of course, Obama got into office and didn't do really anything to penalize the bankers who got us into that, who, you know, for their part, the bankers were doing what was legal under the system, or mostly legal anyway. And Obama said, you know, slap on the wrist, here you go. Austerity for everybody else, shared sacrifice, all that bullshit that we still have not recovered from. I mean, we haven't recovered either from the economic effects or from the political and cultural effects of that rhetoric on the population. Of course, Occupy Wall Street was a rebellion, if an unfocused one, against what was going on with the foreclosures and the student debt after everybody watched corporate America get bailed out. And around that time, relevant to our Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Obama story today, is that Bernie Sanders almost primaried Barack Obama over his inaction. Let's get into that. So this is a story from The Atlantic, February 19, 2020, The Hidden History of Sanders' Plot to Primary Obama. So Bernie Sanders got so close to running a primary challenge to President Barack Obama that Senator Harry Reid had to intervene to stop him. It took Reid 2 conversations over the summer of 2011 to get Sanders to scrap the idea, according to multiple people who remember the incident, which has not been previously reported. That summer, Sanders privately discussed a potential primary challenge to Obama with several people, including Patrick Leahy, his fellow Vermont senator. Leahy, alarmed, warned Jim Messina, Obama's presidential reelection campaign manager. Obama's campaign team was, quote, absolutely panicked by Leahy's report, Messina told me, since, quote, every president who has gotten a real primary has lost a general election. David Plouffe, another Obama, and comment, by the way, not because he might have valid points, but just because it might endanger his power. David Plouffe, another Obama strategist, confirmed Messina's account, as did another person familiar with what happened. Leahy's spokesman did not comment. Messina called Reid, then the Senate Majority Leader, who had built a strong relationship with Sanders, but was also fiercely defensive of Obama. What could you be thinking, Reid asked Sanders, according to multiple people who remember the conversations. You need to stop. So that didn't happen. They talked Sanders down. And then in another incident, 2013, Sanders laid into Obama in a private meeting he held with Democratic senators, saying that the president was selling out to Republicans over Social Security benefits. And this is true. Obama ran as a progressive, ran on hope and change. The world was, after George W. Bush, the world was ready for anything. I mean, even pretty conservative U.S. voters were ready for, for them, what was like a pretty radical change. They were willing to vote for the first African-American president with a Muslim name. And, this was a big step for America, at least on a cultural level. Now, it turns out Obama didn't do anything he promised during the campaign, really, and later described himself in an interview as, quote, a moderate Republican from the 80s. So what do we see here? We see Sanders, longtime congressman, gets elected to the Senate in the 2000s, and nearing the end of his life, this is a guy who has had some kind of interest in social democracy or democratic socialism or Eugene Debs or whatever, and is outraged that Obama is not governing as promised, wants to actually hold him accountable to some of his campaign promises. Did it work? No, it didn't work. Obama passed a right-wing healthcare plan that was the Democratic Party's entire answer to Medicare for all or public option or anything. They gave the private insurance-centered ACA. So Sanders is squawking about that. And then, of course, in 2015, he tries getting Elizabeth Warren to run against Hillary Clinton and says, fuck it, I'll do it myself. So he does. And, of course, this is all recent history. We remember what happened after that. So Sanders now in 2019, who says that he's running a political revolution, isn't. I mean, his rhetoric does represent a departure from that neoliberal turn back to social democracy. And there's even talk in there of putting workers and heads of labor unions onto corporate boards and empowering the working class like never before. As socialists, whatever we want to think about the likely effectiveness of that, this was turning the political discussion on its head. The 1% absolutely could not stand that these things were even being discussed. And for those things, we do give Bernie Sanders some amount of credit. What we don't give him credit for is lying down in the middle of a primary after raising God knows how much money. It was like, I said the wrong number in the past. I think it's like over 200 million. I probably should have checked that before I sat down to record this, but I hate doing these current events videos about the Democratic primary, and I can only just do so much research before this. But he raised an enormous amount of money, record-breaking amount of money from the working class. And then just as the pandemic was rendering the primary illegitimate, a lot of states were pushing their vote, their primary, to the very end, June 23rd, which even as I'm recording this is more than 2 months from now. Just as the coronavirus and the stock market crash is making Sanders' case, he lies down for Joe Biden. What are you doing? So I've heard a lot of excuses for this behavior, and I've had to start banning it on my Facebook page honestly. If you want to defend the sorry sack of shit that Bernie Sanders has turned into, just do it somewhere else. There's plenty of liberal pages you can go do that on. We were offering critical support of the Bernie Sanders campaign insofar as it represented an insurgency against the 1% controlled Democratic Party and was threatening to actually maybe upend that system. Could have succeeded, had Sanders, I firmly believe, had Sanders and his people not been so incredibly timid, oh, why are you guys being so mean to us? I mean, if they believe their own rhetoric, the media is out to destroy the working class. The media works for the 1%, which is out to destroy the working class. So obviously the media, corporate media, as their lapdogs, are going to do the same. There was an interesting discussion about this on Project Gray Zone, or the Gray Zone, I guess it's called now, between Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal. It's a two-part discussion in which they discuss the shortcomings, why the Sanders campaign failed. And it's riddled with suggestions that large swaths of the campaign were these people who want to write for Jacobin today and the New York Times tomorrow, and really just didn't want to fundamentally rock the boat in the revolutionary fashion that they had promised. Shades of Obama, although I think that the Obama thing, in my personal opinion, was a lot more cynical from the start. Sanders, I think, means what he says, but he's not willing to give up his cushy Senate appointments and whatever else, or influential Senate appointments to, actually take on the political establishment, blah, 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 as promised. This is a huge failure. It's a huge betrayal. Nothing has changed about that. So why did Sanders do this? Well, then we got articles from the New York Times and Business Insider saying former President Barack Obama convinced Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders to drop out of the 2020 race over the course of 4 long conversations, according to a Tuesday report from the New York Times. The Times reports that when it became clear that his former Vice President Joe Biden would win the Democratic Party's nomination, Obama told a friend that he, quote, needed to accelerate the end game. At the end of March, Obama made the first of 4 phone calls to the veteran independent senator. 2 people with knowledge of their interactions told the Times that Obama told Sanders that he had succeeded in pushing the Democratic Party and Biden to the left. Mostly, though, Obama listened to Sanders reflect on the campaign and talk about what he planned to do next. Sources close to Sanders said that these calls played an important role in ending his presidential bid last week and endorsing Biden on Monday. Obama followed suit on Tuesday with a stirring endorsement of Biden. Stirring, I suppose. Anyway, if you still believe this guy, if you're still a Barack Obama fan, after all this time, after 8 years of improvements for the 1% and everything else basically going to shit, well, great. Donald Trump is Barack Obama's legacy. Fascism is Barack Obama's legacy. Kids in cages. Barack Obama's legacy, continuation of Bush-era policies. Barack Obama's legacy, handing that apparatus that George Bush built after building it up himself to Donald Trump. That's Barack Obama's legacy. So now Sanders not just calling it there and saying, well, I'm going to lie down for Joe Biden. I'm going to endorse everything I have been up here for the last 5 years. Telling the world is everything wrong with the United States and the world, just taking all that money and then laying down for it. Can't leave well enough alone. We have an AP interview from April 14. Sanders says opposing Biden is, quote, irresponsible. Now, there's been debate and excuse making over this, saying, oh, it's the media trying to make Sanders look bad. So let's read the article. Bernie Sanders said Tuesday that it would be, quote, irresponsible for his loyalists not to support Joe Biden, warning that progressives who, quote, sit on their hands in the months ahead would simply enable President Donald Trump's reelection. Unless there be any question, the 78-year-old Vermont senator confirmed that, quote, it's probably a very fair assumption that he would not run for president again. He added with a laugh, one can't predict the future. Okay, comment. First of all, you'll be 82 years old. Second of all, you've just alienated probably 2/3 of your own base. Okay. And hopefully by then we'll have another leader one who actually believes what he's saying and has the courage to follow through on it. Back to the article. Sanders, who suspended his presidential bid last week, spoke at length about his decision to endorse Biden, his political future, and the urgent need to unify the Democratic Party during an interview with the Associated Press. He railed against the Republican president, but also offered pointed criticism at his own supporters, who have so far resisted his vow to do whatever it takes to help Biden win the presidency. He seemed to distance himself from his campaign's former national press secretary, Brianna Joy Gray, when asked about her recent statement on social media refusing to endorse Biden. Quote, "She is my former press secretary, not on the payroll," Sanders noted. A spokesman later clarified that all campaign staffers were no longer on the payroll as of Tuesday, though they will get a severance check in May. Sanders said his supporters have a simple choice now that Biden has emerged as the presumptive nominee. Quote, "Do we be as active as we can in electing Joe Biden and doing everything we can to move Joe and his campaign in a more progressive direction? Or do we choose to sit it out and allow the most dangerous president in modern American history to get reelected?" He continued, quote, "I believe that it's irresponsible for anybody to say, well, I disagree with Joe Biden. I disagree with Joe Biden, and therefore I'm not going to be involved." But then he goes on. In the article, he vowed to continue fighting for progressive priorities such as his signature Medicare for All as a senator, even though Biden has refused to embrace the government-backed single-payer healthcare system. Comment, actually more than refused to embrace it, he has openly stated he would veto it on national television. Quote, "If people want to vote for me, we'd appreciate it," Sanders said of the roughly 20 primary contests that remain where his name will appear on the ballot. He later added, quote, "I think you're going to see significant movement on the part of the Biden campaign into a more progressive direction on a whole lot of issues." Later, quote, "What would be the sense of staying in, of spending a whole lot of money, of attacking the vice president, giving fodder for Trump? What's the sense of doing that when you can't win?" he asked. Comment, my head is spin. Wow. What? I'm going to come back to that because this was also the basis of a lot of excuses. So going on, quote, "I will do everything I can to help elect Joe." Sanders continued, "We had a contentious campaign. We disagree on issues. But my job now is not only to rally my supporters, but to do everything I can to bring the party together to see that Trump is not elected president." Good fucking luck with that. So I don't know where to start. First of all, if you think that voting in Joe Biden and voting out Trump is going to defeat fascism in America, or even really help defeat fascism in America, you are deluded. We had 8 years of Obama-Biden, and Biden was the more conservative one on that ticket by far. Well, I mean, we don't really know that much about Obama. We know a lot more about Biden, working with segregationists, the whole works, the crime bill, everything. So then we have the point that Obama has convinced Sanders that Joe's going to start moving left and all this kind of thing. So here we have a guy, Sanders, who was going to primary Obama over not following through on his bullshit, on all of these. We're going to close Guantanamo, and if our troops are still in Afghanistan, we're going to get them out, and you can take that to the bank, and blah, blah, blah. And then not really, just kind of letting time go by. Let time get away from him. We have Sanders, this guy who has this history of not seeming to fall for this kind of thing, now wants us to fall for it. What is going on? So he also made the point, I mean, nobody believes that. Joe said just a couple of weeks ago he would veto it. But now Sanders says he believes it. I don't believe that. And Sanders wants us to believe it. Amazing. So, but we also know in the past, and unfortunately I don't have a quote, but Sanders said of Obama, we're going to need his help to get elected. I don't know that that's true, actually. I think most of the people who would have been swayed by Obama's endorsement probably would have just been swayed by the fact that Sanders was a Democrat. These are people who vote for Democrats regardless. I don't know that there's anybody who's thinking of voting for Trump or really thinking of sitting it out who would vote for Sanders because of Obama. I think that that's, or if that's a lot of, I don't think that that's a lot of people. If there are any people, I don't think it's a large percentage. Could be wrong on that. Haven't seen polling. But to this other point about why stay in if we can't win. Well, geez, I don't know. I mean, it's so disingenuous that he's saying this now. And this isn't even the worst of it. I'm about to get to the next article, but this isn't even the worst of it. But to say, why keep raising money, et cetera. So let's go back a couple of weeks ago when his campaign started raising money for coronavirus relief instead of for the campaign. People started making this excuse for him that, well, the primary is not really going to happen and everything else that, that's why he's not raising the money and why he's not continuing to fight. Well, as I may have noted in another video, and I know I've noted in the comments, guess what? That means Joe Biden wins. It's not like, oh, nobody wins. Fair's fair. We're just going to call the whole thing off. No, Sanders dropping out means Biden wins, means corporate America wins, means the 1% win, means that all of this effort, time, energy, money that the working class put into the Sanders campaign for one reason or another, whether it was just even raising class consciousness or advancing the discussion in America about national priorities and class struggle. So I think that started back when he started taking money for the coronavirus thing instead of for himself. That was super early. And then it was like they didn't have a plan to regroup after the Super Tuesday Obama-led consolidation of the other candidates who, just like Sanders got a call, Obama called Pete and Obama called Amy and Obama called all these people. I don't know exactly what happened with Warren, but because she stayed in. But Obama circled the wagons and said, get behind Joe. Sanders was like unable to regroup from this after months of saying we intend to be the nominee this summer. Just stunning that you could get to this level of politics and like be this clueless on taking on the political establishment if that is your prerogative. So we have him wrapping up the fundraising a couple months ago under the guise of Corona. Now we have him wrapping up the entire campaign under the guise of we can't win. So Sanders got 45% of the vote in Alaska after his campaign ended. Now, Alaska may be an outlier, but there was a chance here to do something. Whether or not he was going to get all the votes, we know that in many cases, I believe it's TMDS, research showed that the exit polls were 10 to 15% off in many states. I think it was like 8 states that they have data on for that. We know that there were 44 flash drives in Texas that had vote data that just weren't counted. There were crates of mail-in ballots found in Wisconsin that weren't counted. And this is a consistent pattern going back to 2016. And there's a documentary called Uncounted, the story of the California primary about 2016. It's about 45 minutes long, and it goes into detail about how ragged and just a farce of a primary the Democrats actually held between Hillary and Bernie. So again, this goes back to the earlier comment about you call yourself a political revolutionary, you're laying down in April just as things are, getting a little bit difficult. He just lays down. And then as far as taking on the political establishment, is Obama the political establishment? I think he is. He is a 2-term president who was clearly a friend of Wall Street. Bernie Sanders lays down for him. Well, that's not taking it on. That's sucking up to it. That's laying down for it. And then to turn around, as we just read here, and to call your base irresponsible if they don't want Joe Biden. Man who has been accused of rape credibly. A man who has said he will veto the signature piece that people are supporting Sanders over, and who generally has just a long career of being a shitbag, a right-wing, just absolute piece of crap, right-wing even by Democrat standards. So let's get into the second to last article. We have a Newsweek article called Bernie Sanders asks supporters to donate to Democratic Party, quote, show commitment to party unity. Wow. This is from April 17th by Ayla Slisko. Again, in Newsweek, Senator Bernie Sanders sent his supporters an email Friday urging them to donate to the Democratic National Committee. That is the notorious DNC, for anyone not keeping track of initial letters there. Sanders endorsed former Vice President Joe Biden on Monday after dropping out of the race for president the previous week. The independent senator, who twice sought the Democratic nomination, asked supporters to donate to the DNC in the name of, quote, party unity. My campaign for president may be over, but our struggle continues, the email says, quote, that struggle begins with defeating Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history, but it does not end there. Quote, I will also be doing everything in my power to elect strong progressives at every level of government. It continues, quote, make a $7 contribution to the Democratic Unity Fund today to show your commitment to party unity by helping elect Democrats nationwide. Oh boy. So that's so poisonous. Just to inject a ray of light here, we have a quote from Brianna Joy Gray, referenced earlier on Twitter. Quote, with the utmost respect for Bernie Sanders, who is an incredible human being and genuine inspiration, I don't endorse Joe Biden. I supported Bernie Sanders because he backed ideas like Medicare for all, canceling all student debt, and a wealth tax. Biden supports none of those. My take, the Democrats are planning to lose. Their donors have told them to lose. There's no way, even if you're an out-of-touch capitalist, you think that this is going to work. There's no way. As I mentioned earlier, the circumstances surrounding Barack Obama's election was that he was a young, dynamic leader. I mean, well, he hadn't led that much at that point, but he was a young, dynamic candidate for leadership who was taking the reins after 8 years of George W. Bush plunging the United States into... This is something also I just can't wrap my head around why people don't talk about more. The Bush years. This was not long ago. This was like, just a little over 10 years ago. A complete and utter nightmare. Yes, the United States has long supported covert interventions in other countries and done all kinds of horrible things for imperialism. The Bush years was the time that will be remembered when they rolled out the Patriot Act, the NDAA, the global war on terror, all of this rhetoric about full spectrum dominance of the world by the United States for a new American century, CIA black sites, torture becoming normalized. And then the Democrats they could have put up a goldfish and it would have beaten George W. Bush. I think in that election, Barack Obama, it was like 2-1 beat John McCain. So we now have Donald Trump, who is a fascist buffoon. But if the Democrats can't merely put up a fascist light, I was going to say non-buffoon. Joe Biden is ridiculous, though. So he doesn't even have the charisma. Really, I think what people are kind of hoping for with Obama is like Obama to step back into the spotlight here and use Joe Biden as a surrogate for like a covert return to power, which I can't say wouldn't be entirely the case given the influence that he clearly is demonstrating over the Democratic Party from behind the scenes. Is Biden popular? No, he isn't. I mean, he came in 4th or 5th when the other Democrats were in the race in the primaries in the first few states. Trump, on the other hand, if he manages to get through this coronavirus thing without too much blood on his hands, will be lauded as like a crisis leader. But anyway, so does Joe Biden think he can win? This is an article from The Hill, Jonathan Easley, 4/16/20. Biden on if he can reach Trump's base, quote, probably not. Former Vice President Joe Biden on Wednesday said that he will, quote, probably not be able to reach President Trump's hardcore base of supporters in his run for the White House, saying that some who back the president are drawn to him because he engages in the, quote, politics of division. Speaking at a fundraiser hosted by Joe and Sarah Kiani, the founders of the Massimo Corporation, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee was asked if he hopes to gain support from the president's base during the general election campaign. Biden responded with a laugh comment because, of course, all this is super funny. According to the pool report from the fundraiser, his base? Probably not, Biden said. These are people who support the president because they like the fact that he is engaged in the politics of division, he added. They really support the notion that, all Mexicans are rapists and all Muslims are bad, and dividing this nation based on ethnicity, race. This is one of the few presidents who succeeded by deliberately trying to divide the country, not unite the country. Comment, no, Trump is just the first one to really say the quiet part out loud in a while. They all do this. The United States government supports white supremacy in a wide variety of ways. Biden himself has been involved in these efforts for a long time. They just don't like that Trump is making it so blatantly obvious. And of course, then his supporters identify themselves as really consciously liking it. And so they're derided as, being tasteless or whatever else, when really this has been the underlying message of American political culture and outside of American political culture for a long time. Back to the article, Biden described his own base of supporters as, quote, white working class, high school educated people. Comment, okay, good luck with that. So also this kind of flies in the face of the whole, Biden is there to rally the Democratic African-American support. I give up. And you should too. On the Democratic Party, I've never been a Democrat. Like I said, we supported Bernie Sanders' insurgency within the 1% for what it was worth. As soon as he rolled over, that support, that limited qualified support got retracted. And it's back to just trying to educate people and spread the message of socialism. I don't know. I hate, as I mentioned, covering these current events videos related to the presidential election. I just feel like there's so many people doing this from hardcore Bernie Sanders support kind of perspective. And I want to do so from a further left perspective as well, that even Bernie Sanders is kind of ridiculous and we could be aiming a lot higher. And I think that the note that I'll probably end this on is I remember having a discussion with an older Marxist who, I don't know if he believed his own rhetoric either, but when this was, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, talking about, well, how do we get, from here to something better? And his response was, well, we could just start by going back to what we had before neoliberalism. We could go back to 60s and 70s social democracy, but you can't. You actually can't do that because the 60s and 70s social democracy was in decline at the time, and it was the product of much earlier struggles in the late 19th century and then the first few decades of the 20th century to, really bring about socialism. The capitalist class decided on social democracy as a compromise, but that's all it ever was. And I don't know. I think it's been proven here pretty conclusively. The only non-conclusive part is Bernie Sanders didn't fight that hard. Now, you could argue that a social democrat who did the things that I was talking about earlier in this video, like actually attacked the media, actually understood that these people really are your class enemies, and as such, you've got to be vicious towards them. As vicious as Donald Trump was, even though he was kind of representing just a different faction of the capitalist class, the more like $1 million to $10 million people against the really rich, really old money. But he was able to do that. Those people, even in the Republican Party, they keep tight control over that party to the best of their ability. And he was successful in breaking that, partly with help from the media, but from help from all over the place by virtue of the way that he ran his campaign. Bernie Sanders was pissing his pants like every other day when it came to handling the media in embarrassingly feckless ways. And so you could argue that maybe a social democrat could win, having 15 and 19 to do all over again. If they had gone in a little more vicious or a lot more vicious from the start, hey, maybe we could have elected a social democratic candidate in the Democratic Party. Then again, maybe the media would have, the media wasn't that hard on Bernie Sanders. They just mostly ignored him. Who knows what would have happened? You look at what they did to Jeremy Corbyn over in the Labour Party in the UK with the anti-Semitism and they came out harder against him because he was more of a threat. I think arguably put up a stronger fight than Bernie Sanders did. But on this point of, can we just go back from neoliberalism to 4 or 5 decades ago when we had social democracy? Really not sure we can. And I think that Bernie Sanders gave us a preview of what that fight would be like. And why not just fight for socialism? That's my pitch. This has been Socialism for All. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. Follow us at facebook.com/socialism for all. Support us at patreon.com/socialism for all for as little as $1 a month. And thanks once again to our current patrons whose names are on the screen. I spend a lot of time on this channel right now, and your support is much appreciated. Thank you.